Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to have your own family turn against you? To be stripped of everything you hold dear and thrown into a world of uncertainty and pain? What if I told you that this very betrayal could become the foundation of your greatest triumph? Today, we're diving into one of the most extraordinary stories ever told, a story that will challenge everything you think you know about destiny, forgiveness, and the mysterious ways life can transform our deepest wounds into our greatest strengths. This is the story of Joseph, a young man who went from being his father's favorite son to a forgotten slave in a foreign land, and then to the second most powerful person in an entire empire. It's a journey that will leave you questioning whether what seems like the worst thing that could happen to you might actually be preparing you for something far greater than you could ever imagine. So settle in, because we're about to explore a tale that has captivated hearts and minds for thousands of years, and discover why Joseph's story might just hold the key to understanding your own life struggles and victories. Our story begins in the ancient land of Canaan, where an elderly man named Jacob, also called Israel, lived with his large family. Jacob had many sons, but there was one who held a special place in his heart, Joseph. This favoritism wasn't just a father's natural affection. Joseph was born to Jacob in his old age, and he was the firstborn son of Rachel, the woman Jacob had loved most deeply. Now, Jacob's love for Joseph wasn't kept secret. In fact, he made it quite obvious by giving Joseph something that would become both a blessing and a curse, a beautiful, colorful robe. This wasn't just any piece of clothing. It was a symbol of status, a sign that Joseph was destined for something greater than his brothers. But as we all know, favoritism in families can create dangerous tensions. Joseph's brothers watched as their father showered this special attention on their younger sibling. They saw the beautiful robe, they noticed how Jacob's eyes lit up when Joseph entered the room, and slowly, bitter jealousy began to grow in their hearts. But if they thought the robe was hard to bear, they had no idea what was coming next. You see, Joseph began having dreams. But these weren't ordinary dreams, they were vivid, prophetic visions that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the natural world. In the first dream, Joseph saw himself and his brothers working in a field, binding bundles of grain. Suddenly, his bundle stood upright while all the others gathered around it and bowed down. The meaning seemed clear, even to a young man. Joseph would one day rule over his brothers. When Joseph shared this dream with his family, you can imagine the reaction. His brothers were already struggling with jealousy, and now this dream seemed to suggest that their younger brother would someday have authority over them. The tension in the household must have been thick enough to cut with a knife. But Joseph wasn't done. He had another dream, even more striking than the first. This time, he saw the sun, the moon, and 11 stars all bowing down to him. When he shared this vision, even his beloved father Jacob was taken aback. The dream seemed to suggest that not only his brothers, but even his parents would one day bow before Joseph. Jacob scolded Joseph for sharing such a bold dream, but deep in his heart, he wondered if there might be something divine about these visions. The combination of their father's obvious favoritism and Joseph's dreams that seemed to predict his future dominance created a perfect storm of resentment among the brothers. They couldn't stand the sight of Joseph in his colorful robe, and they certainly couldn't tolerate the idea that he might one day rule over them. Little did they know that their jealousy was about to lead them down a path that would change all their lives forever. One day, Jacob decided to send Joseph to check on his brothers, who were tending the family's flocks in a distant field. It seemed like a simple errand, but when the brothers saw Joseph approaching from far away, wearing that hated colorful robe, something dark stirred in their hearts. They had been nursing their anger and jealousy for so long that it had grown into something dangerous. As Joseph drew closer, his brothers began to plot. Their initial plan was shocking in its brutality. They wanted to kill him. They thought they could murder their own brother and then tell their father that a wild animal had attacked Joseph. It's hard to imagine how hatred could grow so strong that it would lead to such a terrible plan. But thankfully, Reuben, the eldest brother, had a conscience that wouldn't allow him to go through with murder. He convinced the others not to kill Joseph directly, suggesting instead that they throw him into a nearby pit. Reuben secretly hoped he could come back later and rescue Joseph, but fate had other plans. As the brothers were deciding what to do with Joseph, who was now trapped in the pit, they saw something on the horizon that would change everything. A caravan of traders was approaching, heading toward Egypt with their goods. It was then that Judah, another of Joseph's brothers, had what he thought was a brilliant idea. Instead of leaving Joseph to die in the pit, why not sell him to these traders? They could get rid of their troublesome brother and make some money at the same time. And so it was that Joseph, the favored son who had dreamed of ruling over his brothers, was sold into slavery for 20 pieces of silver. As the traders led him away toward an uncertain future in Egypt, his brothers took his beautiful robe and dipped it in goat's blood. They brought this bloody garment back to their father, allowing Jacob to believe that his beloved son had been killed by a wild animal. Jacob's grief was heartbreaking. He mourned for Joseph with such deep sorrow that his other children couldn't comfort him. He was convinced that his favorite son was dead, and that he would carry this sorrow to his own grave. Meanwhile, Joseph was being carried further and further away from everything he had ever known, toward a land where he would be a stranger and a slave. When Joseph arrived in Egypt, he was sold to a man named Potiphar, who was an important official in Pharaoh's court, the captain of the guard. Imagine how Joseph must have felt, going from being a cherished son to being someone's property. Everything he had known was gone, his family, his status, his freedom. He was now completely dependent on the mercy of strangers in a foreign land. But here's where our story takes an interesting turn. Even though Joseph's circumstances had changed dramatically, there was something about him that remained constant. The same divine favor that had given him prophetic dreams seemed to follow him even into slavery. Despite his lowly position, Joseph began to excel in everything he did. Potiphar quickly noticed that Joseph was different from his other servants. Everything Joseph touched seemed to prosper. Projects that Joseph managed succeeded beyond expectations. The household ran more smoothly when Joseph was involved. It became clear to Potiphar that Joseph's success wasn't just due to his own abilities. There was something special about this young Hebrew slave. Recognizing Joseph's exceptional qualities, Potiphar made a remarkable decision. He put Joseph in charge of his entire household. This meant that Joseph, despite being a slave, was now managing the affairs of one of Egypt's most important officials. Under Joseph's care, Potiphar's household flourished like never before. It was as if a special blessing followed Joseph wherever he went, but just when it seemed like Joseph's life was improving, he faced a test that would challenge his character in ways he had never experienced before. Potiphar's wife had noticed this handsome, capable young man who was managing her household so effectively. She began to pursue Joseph, trying to seduce him into an affair. Day after day, she made advances toward Joseph, but he consistently refused her. His refusal wasn't just about loyalty to his master Potiphar, though that was certainly part of it. Joseph recognized that what she was asking him to do would be wrong on a much deeper level. He saw it as a sin against God himself. Despite being far from home and having every reason to feel abandoned, Joseph's moral compass remained strong. Joseph's integrity was about to be tested in the most severe way possible. One day, when the house was empty except for Joseph and Potiphar's wife, she made her most bold advance yet. She grabbed Joseph's cloak and demanded that he sleep with her. Joseph's response was immediate and decisive. He ran from the house, leaving his cloak in her hands. But Potiphar's wife, furious at being rejected and humiliated, decided to take revenge. She used the cloak as evidence for a false accusation, claiming that Joseph had tried to assault her. When Potiphar returned home and heard his wife's story, he was enraged. Without investigating further, he had Joseph thrown into prison. Once again, Joseph found himself in the lowest possible position. From favored son to slave, and now from trusted household manager to imprisoned criminal. It might have seemed like his life was spiraling completely out of control, like every good thing that happened to him was destined to be taken away. But even in prison, that same mysterious favor that had been with Joseph throughout his journey continued to manifest. The prison warden noticed that Joseph was different from the other prisoners. He had a natural ability to lead and organize, and more importantly, he had an integrity that made him trustworthy even in the darkest circumstances. Before long, Joseph was put in charge of all the other prisoners. Just as he had managed Potiphar's household, he now managed the prison with such skill that the warden barely needed to worry about daily operations. Everything Joseph was responsible for ran smoothly and efficiently. It was during this time in prison that Joseph's gift for interpreting dreams would become crucial to his destiny. Two of Pharaoh's officials, the royal cupbearer and the royal baker, were imprisoned for offenses against the king. One night, both men had troubling dreams that left them confused and worried. When Joseph noticed their distress, he offered to help interpret their dreams. He was careful to explain that the ability to understand dreams came from God, not from his own wisdom. Joseph told the cupbearer that his dream meant he would be restored to his position within 3 days. The baker's dream, however, had a much darker meaning. He would be executed within 3 days. Both interpretations proved to be exactly correct. The cupbearer was restored to his position, and the baker was executed, just as Joseph had predicted. Before the cupbearer left prison, Joseph made a simple request. He asked the man to remember him when he returned to Pharaoh's court and to mention that Joseph was imprisoned unjustly, but the cupbearer forgot all about Joseph. For 2 full years, Joseph remained in prison, waiting and wondering if he would ever see freedom again. During this time, he had no way of knowing that his ability to interpret dreams was about to change not only his own life but the fate of an entire nation. After 2 years had passed, Pharaoh began having dreams that deeply troubled him. In one dream, he saw 7 healthy, fat cows grazing by the river. Then 7 thin, sickly cows came up from the river and devoured the fat cows. In another dream, he saw 7 healthy heads of grain growing on a single stalk, and then 7 thin, scorched heads of grain that swallowed up the healthy ones. Pharaoh called for all his wise men and magicians, but none of them could explain what these dreams meant. The king was growing increasingly anxious, and it was at this crucial moment that the cupbearer finally remembered Joseph. He told Pharaoh about the Hebrew slave who had correctly interpreted his dream in prison. Pharaoh immediately ordered that Joseph be brought from prison. After being cleaned up and dressed properly, Joseph stood before the most powerful man in Egypt. When Pharaoh described his dreams, Joseph was careful to give credit where it was due. He explained that the interpretation would come from God, not from his own understanding. Joseph then revealed the meaning of Pharaoh's dreams. Both dreams had the same message: Egypt would experience 7 years of incredible abundance, followed by 7 years of severe famine. The famine would be so severe that it would make people forget the years of plenty that came before it. Joseph didn't just interpret the dreams. He also offered practical advice. He suggested that Pharaoh appoint someone wise and capable to oversee the storage of grain during the good years, so that Egypt could survive the coming famine. Pharaoh was so impressed by Joseph's wisdom and insight that he made an extraordinary decision. He appointed Joseph as second in command over all of Egypt, giving him authority that was exceeded only by Pharaoh himself. Joseph, who had been a prisoner just hours before, now wore Pharaoh's signet ring, dressed in fine linen, and had a gold chain around his neck as symbols of his newfound power. During the 7 years of abundance, Joseph worked tirelessly to store grain in cities throughout Egypt. The harvest was so plentiful that they eventually stopped measuring the grain because there was more than they could count. When the famine finally came, just as Joseph had predicted, Egypt was ready. But the famine didn't affect only Egypt. It spread throughout the known world, including the land of Canaan where Joseph's family still lived. When Jacob heard that there was grain available in Egypt, he sent his sons to buy food for their family. But he kept Benjamin, his youngest son and Joseph's only full brother, at home because he couldn't bear the thought of losing him too. When Joseph's brothers arrived in Egypt, they came before the powerful Egyptian official who controlled the grain distribution. They didn't recognize that this man was their brother Joseph, whom they had sold into slavery so many years ago. But Joseph knew immediately who they were. Instead of revealing his identity right away, Joseph decided to test his brothers to see if they had changed. He spoke to them harshly and accused them of being spies. When they protested that they were simply hungry men from Canaan seeking food, Joseph demanded that they bring their youngest brother Benjamin to prove their story was true. Joseph kept one brother, Simeon, as a hostage and sent the others back to Canaan with grain. But he also secretly returned the money they had paid, which terrified the brothers when they discovered it. They were afraid they would be accused of theft. Back in Canaan, Jacob was heartbroken when he heard that he needed to send Benjamin to Egypt. Benjamin was his only remaining connection to his beloved wife Rachel, and he couldn't bear the thought of losing him too. But as the famine continued and their food ran out, Jacob had no choice but to let Benjamin go. When the brothers returned to Egypt with Benjamin, Joseph invited them to feast at his house. He was so moved by seeing Benjamin again that he had to leave the room to weep privately. But his testing wasn't over yet. Before they left, Joseph ordered that his silver cup be hidden in Benjamin's sack. Soon after the brothers departed, Joseph's servants chased them down and accused them of stealing the cup. When it was found in Benjamin's sack, the brothers were devastated. They returned to Joseph's house, and Judah offered to become a slave in Benjamin's place. This moment was the turning point for Joseph. He saw that his brothers were no longer the same men who had sold him into slavery. They had grown in character and were now willing to sacrifice themselves for their family. Joseph could no longer contain his emotions. With tears streaming down his face, Joseph finally revealed his true identity to his stunned brothers. "I am Joseph," he said. "Is my father still alive?" His brothers were speechless, unable to believe what they were hearing. But Joseph quickly reassured them. Instead of seeking revenge, he told them not to be distressed about what they had done. He explained that God had sent him to Egypt ahead of them to save lives during the famine. What they had intended for evil, God had used for good. Joseph instructed his brothers to return to Canaan and bring their father and all their families to Egypt. Pharaoh, hearing about Joseph's reunion with his family, offered them the best land in Egypt to settle in. When Jacob learned that Joseph was alive and ruling in Egypt, he was overwhelmed with joy and immediately prepared to make the journey to see his son. The reunion between Joseph and his father was deeply emotional. After years of separation and grief, they were finally together again. Joseph brought his father before Pharaoh, who welcomed the entire family and gave them the fertile land of Goshen to call their own. Joseph's wisdom continued to benefit Egypt throughout the years of famine. As people ran out of money to buy grain, Joseph allowed them to trade their livestock, and eventually their land, for food. Through his careful management, Pharaoh gained control of most of Egypt's wealth and land, strengthening the kingdom significantly. As Joseph grew older, he never forgot the promises God had made to his people. Even as he lived in luxury and power in Egypt, he remembered that his family's ultimate destiny was connected to the land of Canaan. Before he died, he made his brothers promise that when God eventually led their people out of Egypt, they would take his bones with them. Joseph's story is one of the most remarkable examples of how life's greatest challenges can become the foundation for our greatest achievements. From a favored son to a betrayed brother, from a slave to a prisoner, and finally to a ruler who saved nations from starvation, Joseph's journey shows us that our setbacks don't define our destination. His story teaches us about forgiveness, resilience, and the mysterious ways that our struggles can be transformed into our strengths. Joseph could have become bitter about his brother's betrayal, angry about false accusations, or resentful about years of imprisonment. Instead, He chose to see God's hand working through every difficult circumstance. The young man who once dreamed of his brothers bowing down to him learned that true leadership isn't about power over others, but about serving others. The dreams that once caused jealousy and division ultimately became the means through which Joseph saved his family and countless others from starvation. Joseph's life reminds us that even when we can't see the bigger picture, there might be purposes and plans at work that are far greater than we can imagine. His story encourages us to remain faithful and maintain our integrity, even when life seems unfair or when we're facing impossible circumstances. Most importantly, Joseph's story shows us the power of forgiveness. When he had every right to seek revenge against his brothers, he chose instead to embrace them and provide for them. His forgiveness wasn't just a personal choice, it became the foundation for healing and restoration that affected generations. So the next time you face betrayal, setbacks, or circumstances that seem impossible to overcome, remember Joseph's story. Remember that your current situation might not be your final destination. Remember that maintaining your integrity and faith, even in the darkest times, can position you for a future you never imagined possible. And remember that forgiveness isn't just about releasing others from their wrongs, it's about freeing yourself to step into the amazing destiny that might be waiting for you. If Joseph's incredible journey from betrayal to blessing has inspired you as much as it has inspired us, we'd love to hear from you. Hit that like button to let us know this story touched your heart, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss more amazing stories that reveal the hidden truths and life-changing lessons from history's most remarkable people. Leave a comment below and tell us about a time when something that seemed like the worst thing that could happen to you actually led to something better. Share this video with someone who needs to hear Joseph's story of hope and resilience today. Until next time, remember that your story isn't over yet, and your greatest chapter might still be waiting to be written.